Hi, my name is Kathy Walker. Welcome to my home. A few months ago, the Sequoyah County Historical Society asked me to come and speak to them about my family and our roots that are in the Pawpaw Bottoms. At the time, we tried to video it because several people expressed an interest in hearing it, but technical difficulties arose, of course, and so we were unable to do that. So today I would like to try and tell you what I said that day, and it won't be exactly verbatim because I ad-lib a lot, and there's no one in the room to laugh at the jokes that I told. So anyway, welcome, and here we go. That's my dog. This beautiful picture behind me is the reason that I came to speak there. It was both an honor and a privilege to be able to speak before the Historical Society. It elated me when Daniel Walters gave me an invitation to come and speak today. It is a joy to me, and I hope that you can see that my roots run very deep in Pawpaw community, Sequoyah County, Oklahoma. And when I'm finished with my story, I hope you see that. I would like to thank my cousin Mildred Johnson, who is 91, I believe now, who helped with some of the stories that were told. I would also like to thank Joe Lee, who was able to speak with me before he passed recently. That meant so much. This book, The History of Sequoyah County from 1828 to 1975, has a whole lot of wonderful information in it, as does a small book that you can get from the Muldrow Library by Howard Thomas Watts. He made this little book in 1986, and he had a lot of wonderful stories in his book as well that I pulled from. The painting that you see back here that I commissioned Daniel to paint came out in an article in the Sequoyah County paper on December the 22nd of 2022. And this article talked about my friends that we would gather there at the church several nights a week usually in our younger years when we were growing up and becoming who we would become, and the people with the morals and the ethics and all that we ended up being started there. And those 9 friends, some of them, a lot of them have passed, and that's the reason for the painting is the stars in the sky are the ones that passed, and now we're all on there now. But those 9 friends were Carl Mize Jr., Richard Mize, Gail Clontz, Kent Edwards, Brian Shamlin, Rodney Pruitt, Thomas Robinson, Alan, and Morgan Pewitt. Shh. Sorry. She's a little noisy thing. Hey. Shh. Pawpaw originally got its name, I believe, from the fruit that grew there, which was a little small banana-like fruit, and it was very abundant and quite tasty from what I understand. There was talk that it may have come from a militia group out of Missouri, but there's no proof of that. There's nothing that we could find that indicated that that was true. When we were out in Pawpaw growing up, little did I know at the time that I was walking on the grounds of my people. We gathered in front of this little one-room church school. This building was constructed in 1883. Being a small community at the time, it doubled as a church on Sunday and a school during the week. Since there were different denominations and beliefs, the preacher would rotate throughout the county. Most of these preachers rotated around to the other small churches. It didn't seem to matter which preacher was there. Most all of the folks came on Sunday. The church had 2 big events a year. Mother's Day was a memorial for the graveyard behind the church. The children would spend the morning gathering wildflowers for the graves, while the mothers and the grandmothers would prepare food to eat at on the lawn. The children would line up 2 by 2 and go between the graves, and each grave would get flowers. My cousin Mildred remembers this very distinctly, about getting the flowers. And the mothers and the grandmothers would put their clothes on their tablecloths. Got my tongue twisted up there. They would put their tablecloths out on the grass, and they would put out all the food that they had prepared. And after the eating, the men would gather with any instruments they might have. They might have a fiddle or a harmonica or guitars or whatever, and they would sing hymns. I would have loved to have been a butterfly that would have been able to fly by and listen to that music and the laughter of the children. The other event that would be a play at Christmas time, and the children would have that play, and they would either have a part or they read a poem or whatever, and the whole community would be there, and that would be their Christmas celebration. Now, as the community grew, it now had a store and a post office, had a blacksmith shop. More families were moving in, and was decided that a bigger building was needed for the school. The new school was built in 1908, and it was just north of the little church. It started with 1 teacher. They added a second story and another teacher. And in 1926, the school was torn down and a new 2-story red brick building was erected. It had 4 large rooms, an office, a library, an auditorium to be used for literary societies, theatrical productions, and other public meetings. It was a fully accredited high school. It was one of the best schools in eastern Oklahoma. Some of the folks that came out of this little school later became school teachers themselves. I was absolutely thrilled when I learned that some of my own teachers were among them. Alta Green Mizell was my first grade teacher. Maud Helen Shackelford Peters taught me bookkeeping. Lucille Shackelford Blaylock, and I believe she taught history, but gosh darn, I can't remember for certain. So this small community contributed to my own education as well. My great-grandparents that had moved there were Sankey Lewis and Sadie Frances Doyle Owensby. They did not own their land. They were sharecroppers. It was a hard, back-breaking job. That dog. They had 8 children: Rose, Paul, Pearl, Ruby, Tom, Winona, Neoma, and Jack. They also had a baby, Geneva, that died about a year old from pneumonia or consumption or whatever they called it back then. My great-grandmother was Neoma. She was the last girl and the next to the last one, and from what I've been told was spoiled rotten. They called her Frizz. Her hair was curly, and I guess it frizzed instead of curled sometimes. My papa was a twin. To tell them apart, his mother would roll the cuffs of his pants up. Papa would do this for the rest of his life. He always wore a Stetson hat. The house they had on Breedland, the house they had on. I'm trying to see if this is still recording, and I guess it is. Okay. Please forgive me. You know, this is out of my realm a little bit, but I wanted to do this for the folks that wanted to hear it. My papa was a twin, and to them, to tell his twin apart from him, they would roll up his pants cuffs. And Papa did that for the rest of his life. He always wore a Stetson hat. The house that they were that they stayed in was on Breedlove Island. If you know where Breedlove Island is, just as you go down the little dip and back towards that house set to the right of there. Because of the flood in 1927 that wiped out several of the homes and businesses, Papa always went out and measured the water. He had a long stick, and he would go back behind that spot there on Breedlove Island where that slough come back out of the river, and he would measure twice a day. That way he knew if the river was up, because as you well, they didn't have weathermen like we do now, and it could be raining upstream and they wouldn't know it, and they could get flooded. So it was very wise of him to do that. He did a lot of fishing in that slough as well. My cousin Mildred also said that she was Papa's favorite grandchild, of course, and he would take her fishing with him down there. Mildred attended the day that I spoke at the Historical Society, and she added in there that come Easter, the kids could take their shoes off, and that they would be able to run barefoot all summer long, and that they could not wait till Easter came so that they could run barefoot. They lived in a very simple house. It was hot in the summer. They didn't even have a fan. It was very cold in the winter. My Aunt Doodle, which is Winona, but she was always Aunt Doodle, told me about waking up with having so many quilts on the bed you could barely move, but when you woke up there would be snow on top of the quilts. In the summer, they would take those quilts down to the Wilson Rock, where the Wilson Rock Bridge is. At the time, it wasn't there, but it was that area of water, that slough that comes back off of the river. And they would wash out their quilts. They would hang them in the trees, and while they bathed. Aunt Doodle also told me about walking to school, and there's a small creek, and I don't know, I think it may be Rabbit Creek that goes through there, but anyway, it's a small creek. And she said they didn't have a bridge. They just had a dead tree across there, and they would have to use this dead tree to get over to the school from Breedlove Island. So either her or my grandma sometimes would misstep, and it would be back to the house to get some dry clothes because you fell in the creek. And in the winter, I'm sure that was not a very pleasant thing. Granny Owensby made all of the children's clothes with her sewing machine. And most of the time they were made out of flour sacks, which was a thing then. The company that made these flour sacks discovered that poor folks were making clothes out of their sacks. They did a wonderful thing and started putting prints on these flour sacks. This was a big treat for the poor folks like my people. It was, when it was your turn to get a new dress or a new shirt or whatever, you got to go to town and you got to pick out the print that was on the flour sack. Granny kept a very simple house. It was a table and chairs for eating, beds for sleeping. They didn't have any upholstered furniture. The table would have food on it most of the day so that the grandchildren or whatever, if they could grab a biscuit or something, they had biscuits and gravy in there most of the time. And it would all be underneath a tablecloth to keep the flies out. The flood of 1927 was an awful thing, but the resilient folks built back, thinking that the odds of another flood were very slim. But we all know that in 1943 a flood came that literally tore land off the banks of the river in just big, huge chunks, and off down the river it went. It was extremely devastating on a whole new level that these folks couldn't even wrap their minds around. And that would be the one that they just couldn't build back from. It just wasn't a flood. And when I was able to go speak with Joe Lee, he was telling me, I don't know, if you know the area, you know, where we always called it, when my friends and I were down there, we called it the Bottomless Pond. It is, if you go south off of 64 Highway, straight down Pawpaw Road, you will come to a big pond, spot that has a pond, and unfortunately now it's more of a dumping spot. It just usually has trash around it. But Joe Lee told me that there was a house that sat there, and when this flood came, we always called it the Bottomless Pond because everyone said that if you would put gear on and swam, you would end up in the Arkansas River. So you could go all the way from this pond all the way back up into the river. And now I understand that because that is true. Joe says that this house that sat right there on that spot, when this flood came, began to spin. And it spun faster and faster and faster. And the harder it spun, it started sinking. And he said that house went all the way to the roof. And I imagine as time went on, it probably pulled all of that down in there. But that to me is a very interesting story, and that's history that the books don't talk about. And the only way we know that is by stuff like this. You know, going to your historical societies, going and reading history. And I love history. The day I spoke there, I am the newest member of the Historical Society. There may be somebody new now, but you lose sense of who you are and where you came from if you don't keep up with your people and where they came from. In 1986, as I talked about earlier, Howard Thomas Watts wrote a book about Pawpaw, and it was a wonderful picture of Pawpaw. You know, in it and in this book, it has pictures of the baseball teams. And Joe Lee told me about the baseball teams, that each little community, you know, there's Pawpaw Central, then there was Lee's Chapel and Maple and all the different little bitty communities in Sequoyah County, and they all had their own baseball team. You know, early on, way back then, you know, they had a baseball team. And then on Sunday afternoons, that's what everyone did. They would go and they would watch these young men play baseball. And in this wonderful book, there are pictures of some of those people. But that was just another part of what they did. You know, church on Sunday morning, probably a big dinner, and then you would go out and watch baseball. You know, because there was a whole lot else to do, and not very many people had cars. So there was a lot of walking going on. You know, in Howard and Mr. Watts's book, he talked about, you know, how that had the new navigational system that was put in, you know, the dams, the Kerr-Locken Dam and such that goes, and the other ones that go up and down the Arkansas River. If they had been in place at the time this happened, that, you know, this flood probably would not have happened. But I just can't, you know, the flood of, the 100-year flood is what they called it, the flood of 2019, you know, it wouldn't have mattered because those navigational systems were in place at that time. And if anybody has been down in the bottoms since then, you know, it totally, I mean, it was very destructive. There wouldn't have been anyone that could have come out of that, or any houses that would have come out of it. My papa later in his life went on to work for the county, and he helped build that wrought iron bridge that was over Wilson Rock for so many years that's not there anymore. And he also helped to build the railroad tracks in Muldrow and the water tower that's there at Muldrow. You know, my family, we had, not all of them stayed in that area, but, you know, a lot of them did. My mother was born at the end of Lee's Chapel Road. You go on past the cemetery down, and the road tees there. And there was a little bitty cabin, not, you know, some very small cabin, and that's where my mother was born. And short of a trip once to California for a little while, you know, a vacation, not a going to stay, and a trip to Florida, my mother never left Sequoyah County. And she probably lived within most of her life within 10 miles of where she was born, and now she's laid to rest within a half a mile of where she was born. But all of this, and studying about all of this and learning about all of this, has helped me understand a lot more about my people, and I think it thrills me to know that when I was growing up, I was walking on the same grounds that they did, you know. And if you have any stories about Pawpaw, please leave us a message at the end of this and tell us about it. Gosh, I'm not the only one. Like I said, there were people that were interested in California and in Texas that wanted to see this. You know, they want to hear it. So if you've got a story, please feel free to leave it at the end of this, and any comments. And please forgive my dog for the background noise. She does the best she can. But anyway, thank you so much for listening to this, and may God bless you, and Maybe we'll do another story sometime.